The first step to deciding whether to pursue a residency or specialization is to decide what your professional goals are. I know this seems like a duh moment, but I'm always surprised when I hear clinicians complain and seem somewhat regretful about completing a residency. As someone who has completed a residency, I want to speak about the actual reality of completing one and speak on practical strategies to help you make a better decision. It depends. I know. It's a favorite phrase every student and clinician wants to hear. So, this podcast is here to help. Welcome to the It Depends podcast, the podcast that answers the burning questions of the curious and driven physical therapist. This podcast is a deep dive into clinical and professional topics in the field of physical therapy, providing actionable tools and strategies early professionals and students can use to be impactful in the field of physical therapy. Let's start with this concept of professional goal. What exactly is it? I think of professional goals as a personal mission statement. They are ideals and aspirations that a clinician has. Having a professional goal is not necessary, and I think that is a reason it is overlooked as a concept in general. One of the big reasons is that many people enter professional careers looking for some form of sustainable employment. There are qualities of a job that are very appealing to people, which is why they go into those specific fields. For healthcare, many will say the ability to work with patients, the ability to work in a team environment, or the ability to impact lives are the reasons that they went into healthcare. And while it is important to have this fit where a career has those qualities that matches your desires, it is important to note here that when we speak about professional goals, we're not talking about this. Professional goals are much more specific and are tied to what you hope to accomplish. And for some people, their professional goals are tied closely to patient care, while others have ambition to transition into roles in administration or upper management. So you might start to see where I'm going with this point. Depending on what your professional goals are, completing a residency or seeking specialization might not actually be worth your while. Instead, you probably want to find other routes to go down. So then that takes us to our first step. Define your professional goal. And the first step is, do you even have a professional goal? This question puts us in an interesting position because now we have our first split in the road. And depending on where you're at in your journey, this might be the reality that you don't have a professional goal. If that is the case, my recommendation is that you do not complete a residency or seek specialization. So, what if you do have a professional goal? How do you then make the decision? Once again, we need to go back to define what your professional goal is. Residencies are intended for clinical practice. If your professional goals have nothing to do with clinical practice, then completing a residency will not be the right move. But if your professional goal does have a clinical component, then you want to ask yourself, how will I be able to accomplish this goal? Next, you also want to ask, what are the different paths that will lead me to meeting these goals? If you ask yourself those two questions and the residency seems feasible, then you want to start exploring that route. So I actually recently just came across my residency application and my mission statement, and I want to go over that with you guys. I think that will just help out in just clarifying what the decision making process was on my end. And maybe that gives you a better idea or gives you some blueprint to work off of. And the goal here is to show you how professional goals influence the decision making process. So here's a snippet of my professional mission statement. My professional goal is to improve cardiovascular health outcomes in underserved regions. In order to accomplish this, I need a level of proficiency that a residency program offers. The cardiopulmonary residency program provides a structured and intense curriculum that will provide me with extensive clinical training, research opportunities, professional development, and academic experience. The role of the physical therapist is no longer confined to clinical care, and it is my belief that the modern day clinician should strive for expert proficiency in their field, working proficiency with research, and have good teaching/communication skills. Attaining this level of proficiency is extremely difficult in the field of cardiopulmonary physical therapy due to the underrepresentation of this field in our profession, especially in my home state of Arizona. So that is a snippet of my mission statement that I sent off to residencies in hopes of getting into one. And, luckily I was able to get into a residency program. And whether that's a good mission statement or not is up for debate. But I want to highlight 3 take home points to emphasize how professional goals drive the course of action, in this case, seeking specialty training or not. For me, I knew what my broad professional goal was. It was to address cardiovascular health outcomes in underserved regions. But how do you achieve this as a PT? I had no idea, which takes us to point 1, a problem too great to figure out on your own. If knowing what to do was easy, you probably won't be listening to this episode, and that is the boat I was in. I knew where I wanted to go, but there was no blueprint I could follow. To my knowledge, there were no PTs who had similar professional goals, so I couldn't look to anyone to ask what I should do, or stalk them online to see what they were doing to try to integrate some of what they were doing. The other difficulty with achieving this professional goal was that I didn't even have access to the basic level of exposure to the field that I was interested in. What was a cardiopulmonary PT even? When I was in residency, there were less than 5 cardiopulmonary specialists in Arizona, and in the US, the number of specialists was also limited. So while you could easily find experts in the field of orthopedic or neuro, the options were limited for cardiopulmonary. Moving on to point 2, barrier to entry. If you do decide you want to become a specialist, you should understand what the requirements are. For most specialists, there are many accessible methods to achieving board specialization. While the cardiopulmonary specialty is not the hardest specialty to qualify for, it does have requirements that preclude potential applicants. One of those is submitting research or another equivalent project. And this is not an experience most clinicians have exposure to, especially once they are in the field. And because of this barrier, many potential applicants fail to qualify to sit for the cardiopulmonary specialty. The other barrier to entry is the opportunity for exposure. Depending on where you live, the likelihood of exposure to the breadth of a specialty area might not be accessible. At least that was the case for me. There were no opportunities for exposure to cardiac or pulmonary rehab or shadowing a cardiopulmonary specialist. So it would have been difficult to gain the knowledge and experience I needed to meet my professional goals. And the last point, point 3, was opportunities. This also goes with exposure that I mentioned in part 2. And with residencies, there are built-in opportunities and experiences that expose you to other components of practice that might not be accessible elsewhere. In this case, it was exposure to academic and research experiences. Since these areas were part of my professional goals, it made the potential experience from the residency pair well. And so what's the big deal with this? Why did I need to get this exposure to clinical, academic, and research opportunities? Well, as you see in my mission statement, I made mention of what I envisioned to be the most ideal level of professional competency. This was what I valued. So when faced with a metaphorical fork in the road, it was logical for me to go the route of a residency because it will give me training and opportunities in these areas. So is a residency or specialization necessary? Well, it depends. I'm kidding. We don't use that phrase around here. A residency or specialization will only be as useful as you make it, and that will be based on your professional goals. For those considering residencies or specialization, the question to ask is, what is your professional goal? And how would specializing help you achieve that? And then ask yourself, are there ways to achieve this goal outside of completing a residency or specializing? And these are all good questions to ask. And I hope this episode helps you with your decision. That is all for this episode. Be great this week.